Welcome to MSPTDA video number 4. And in this video, we got to see how to use Power Query to import data from multiple Excel files and dump them into a single table. Now, last video, video number 3, that was our introduction to Power Query, and we saw how to import data from a table in the current workbook, an Access database, and multiple text files. So this is our 4th example of going and getting data. This time, our data is coming from multiple Excel workbooks. We need to import them all and append into one single table. Now, the topics are listed here, and the key cool concepts we're going to learn is we're going to learn how to import Excel files from a folder. Remember, last video, we imported text files from a folder. But now we get to see how to do it with Excel files. We'll have to extract the file name to create a new column for city. If you look over here, look at that. Inside, and we'll look at the tables inside these files. But inside those files, there's no column for city. So we're going to have to get Oakland, Portland, San Francisco for each one of these files and make sure there's a column that lists the city name for every record. And this will be the first time that we're going to see how to use custom columns. We'll get to see this cool Power Query function, Excel.Workbook. And finally, we'll actually have to extract the worksheet name because the SalesRep name is in the Sheet tab, not in the table. So we'll have to extract it and create a new column for SalesRep. So this is going to be exciting. We get to get the data from inside the Excel files, the file names, and the sheet names. And they will automatically become new columns. Later, just like we saw last video, when we add a new city, a new Excel file, the table and any resulting reports will all update. Now, amongst the files you can download in the links below the videos, one of them is a zipped folder. And inside this folder, when you unzip it, are lots of different files. Now, we want to do two things. We want to go look at the structure of the data inside of one of these files. And we want to talk about what makes importing multiple Excel files more difficult and complicated than the text files we imported in last video. Now, first, let's go double-click on this file. And the first thing we want to notice is that we have a table of data with 4 columns: date, product, units, and sales. And down in the Sheet tab name, that's the sales rep, Fran. There is no column here that says sales rep. Every single record here is for the sales rep, Fran. If we go to a new sheet, this sheet is named Gab. And there's the same type of table: date, product, units, and sales. So we need to import the data from each sheet, and we need Power Query to grab the sheet name, add an extra column called sales rep, and repeat the sales rep name for each record. Now, notice we have a sales rep, Fran, Gab, and Poppy. Now, before Power Query, we either had a terrible manual process or we had to write some VBA code. But with Power Query, it will have no problem grabbing the data from each sheet and adding an extra column for the sales rep name. Now, that's the data. Power Query will easily access that data. The thing that's going to make importing data from an Excel workbook more complicated than a text file is because in a text file, it's just one object. Last video, when we told Power Query to look inside a folder to see text files, that one file had only one object. It had a proper data set. That's why when we were in Power Query, we were allowed to combine these text files directly. We click the double pointing downward arrow, and boom, the tables were appended. What's going to be different about using Power Query to import multiple Excel files from a folder is that any one given Excel file can have multiple different objects. Now, in terms of accessing the data on each sheet, that's exactly what we want. We want to be able to get from inside a single Excel file however many sheets there are. But there's other possible objects, like an Excel table, like a print range, and other types of objects. that might be in an Excel file that we have to filter out. If we come back to our Oakland file, we definitely want Fran, Gab, and Poppy. We want to get the data from each sheet and the sheet name. If we go over to the sheet name, sheet 1, well, we don't want to import a sheet that contains the word sheet, so we'll have to filter that out. If we come up to the name box, you can see right here, small table, that's a defined name. If we come up to the name dropdown, small table 2, that's a table object. But there's other potential objects in an Excel workbook. If you set a print range is a defined name. Also, if you use advanced filter, there's a criteria area and an extract area. If I click on criteria area, someone used this data set. This is the criteria, and this is the extract range. When you use advanced filter, those defined names are automatically created. So the moral of the story is when we import Excel files, we want to make sure and build the query to import only the objects we want. All right, now I'm going to close this. We also want to, when we point Power Query to this folder, Power Query will pull in data about each file. We're then going to have to filter. So for example, we don't want .cvs, .txt, or an access file. So we'll have to filter to just include the Excel files. Also, just like last video, we'll be careful since Power Query is case sensitive. If we want capital XLSM and lowercase .xlsm, we'll have to build that filter in also. All right, we're in our start file. We are on the sheet data. I want to go up to data, get and transform, queries and connections. That's Power Query over here in Excel. Now look at this get data. That was the same button we saw in Power BI Desktop when we imported text files. When I click the dropdown, the list of options is in a slightly different order over here. So from file, from folder, like we used over in Power BI Desktop, we had to click more to get to from folder. But here in Excel, from file, from folder. It wants to know where the file is. We click browse. We're going to point it to that folder. We're telling Power Query import everything in that folder. Click OK. Click OK. We do not want to click combine or load. We have Excel files and other types of files with a bunch of objects, including many objects we don't want. So we want to click transform data. This will open up Power Query Editor. The very first thing is come over, and we're going to give this a good name. All Excel sheet data into one table, and enter. Now we have the file names. If we click over in binary off to the side, we can see, oh, there's the .csv, text. There's one of the Excel files we want. There's the name of the file, and here's the extension. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to right-click extension and point to transform. Please show me all lowercase. Now we can do a filter just to get the Excel files. Now we want .xlsx and .xlsm, so we're going to click the filter, come down to text filters. And we want to come down to contains. Now we click in the text box for contains .xls. Now I can click OK. Now we have exactly the files we want. Now a contains filter with .xls will give us, of course, .xls, .xlsx, .xlsm, and even .xlsb. Now the next step before we get at the data in our Excel files is to get the name of the city. Well, we can do that by splitting by the delimiter dot. So with name selected, right-click, down to split column by delimiter. There it is. It guessed right, the dot. And I'm going to do rightmost delimiter. That way, if we happen to have a city name with a dot somewhere over to the left, it'll properly split by the extension after the dot. Click OK. And there we have our name. That means when we get at the right objects in that Excel file right there, meaning the data on each sheet, Portland will be repeated in a column. So we know the data from this sheet is from the Portland store. Now, before we rename this, I want to notice something over here. We've seen this in many examples last video, when we did split by delimiter, it automatically adds change type. There were a few other instances where the column automatically got the data type changed. Now, I think about 50% of the time I like this automatic step, 50% I don't. So I got to show you where we can turn that option off. And actually, let's delete these steps, and we'll redo that in just a second. Come up to the drop down. And down here, Options and Settings, over to Query Options. I click. And down here under Data Load, there it is, automatically detect column types and headers for unstructured sources. So I'm going to uncheck this. Now, when I click OK, if we redo this step, down to Split by Delimiter, rightmost, click OK, it didn't add the second step. Now you get to decide, but I had to show you that since the last video we actually X'd out that step quite often. Now we have what we want, our city name. Double click and we'll rename the column. City and enter. Now what we can't do is use that button right there like we did for text files. We actually need to select content. Hold Control or Shift, click on city, and I want to remove all the other columns. Right click, remove other columns. Now we have content. That's the file with all the objects and the city name. Our next task is to add a helper column, or in Power Query, they're called custom columns. And we're going to use a Power Query M code function called Excel.Workbook that can look in an Excel file and pull out information about the different objects. So we go up to Add Column, and there it is, Custom Column. We're going to name this column something like Get Excel Data. Now we're going to use a Power Query function called Excel.Workbook, open parentheses. Remember, Power Query is case sensitive, so you have to spell it right and get the right case. Now, Excel.Workbook just needs the content column. That's the name of this column that contains each one of the files. Now, as this formula copies down, it can look into each file and pull out the objects. Now, there's a second argument to Excel.Workbook, comma. And this argument is, do you want your headers to be promoted? Well, each one of our tables have proper field names, so we do want them promoted so that each table is a proper data set. And the way we do that is we type lowercase true. True means please promote headers. Close parentheses. And now that function will work on each one of the files. When I click OK, there it is, a table column. I can click off to the side, and I do not see the actual tables of data. What I see are important columns, name, data, item, kind, and hidden. If we scroll down, we can see in the kind column, each one of these objects are sheets. Here's the name. If I scroll down a little bit, oh, there's a table object. Scroll down further, these are defined names. And that's how we can get at filtering to see just the objects we want. Now, before we use that expand column to get at those tables, I don't need content anymore. Right click, remove. Now, when I expand this, it'll give me that new table with information about the objects, and it will repeat the city name for each row. So I'm going to expand, uncheck use original columns as prefix. I will take all of the columns, click OK. And there it is, repeated Oakland for all the different objects that it found. Now, name and item column are very similar. That's the name of the object. You could see there's a slight difference here in name. There's the filter database. Over here, it lists the sheet name also. The data column. If you click off to the side, not on the green table, you can see, oh, that's one of the sheets with the table of data. If I click down on Small Table Tool, that's our table object. If I click off to the side, I can see that object. If I click off to the side for filter database, that was the filter database. That's the criteria. So each one of these tables is the actual object that Excel.Workbook pulled out. Now, this column tells us what kind of object it is. And look at this. This is hidden. And sure enough, filter database. If you're over in Excel and you open up Name Manager, you don't see the name for filter database. That's because it's a hidden name. Now we have to create two filters to get at just the tables of data that we want. The first one is we're going to filter the kind column to include only sheet. So I click the drop down for filter. And we could do text filters equals, but because we have multiple items in this list, we can uncheck everything and then check just the item we want. When I click OK, now we have filtered by only the sheet object. Now we have a problem over here because in the name column, that's the name of the sheet, sheet 1. That's a default name, not one of the properly named sales rep tabs like Fran, Gabby, and Poppy. So we want to filter this column and filter out anything that starts with sheet. So I click the drop down, text filters, and we want to say does not begin with, and we can type sheet. Now when I click OK, now we have exactly what we want. Each one of the tables, we could see date, product, units, and sales. Now, when we expand this, every one of these tables will be stacked on top of each other with one proper set of field names at the top. Not only that, but 1, 2, 3, 4 columns will also include city and name. Now, that name is not a good column name, so I'm going to double click, and we're going to call this SalesRep and enter. Now, I need to get rid of these 3 columns, and then I need to have these 3 columns selected before I click that expand button. Now, the order in which I select these columns will determine the final order of the columns in the final table. I want the first 4 columns in each table to be the first column, so I select date. Then I hold Control and click on city, which will be the 5th column. Then, still holding Control, I want sales rep as the 6th column, so I click on sales rep. I clicked data, city, and sales rep. So that's the order of the columns in the final table. Now, first I need to right-click, remove other columns. Now, notice that column is first. I can click expand, uncheck that one. I want all 4 columns. Click OK. And that is absolutely amazing. Date, product, unit, sales, city, and sales rep. Now, we, of course, turned off the option for data type. But no problem. We usually want to save that one to the end. So now I'm going to go through and make sure we have the correct data type. Because things like dates and numbers may not work the way you expect them to work unless they have the right data type. So I click the icon ABC123 and select date, text, whole number, currency, text, and this one will be text also. There's all of our steps. And remember the amazing thing about Power Query. We already saw in this one that we could delete a few and go back. And in last video, we saw that. But you can go back and look at any step. Not only that, but something very important, the source. If you come over to the side and click this gear icon here, that's the file path. If that file path ever changes, you simply open Power Query and come back here and edit this. Now I'm going to click Cancel. I'm ready to run all of these steps and load. And we're going to load this one to the Excel workbook. So I'm going to click the drop-down, Close and Load To. I do want it as a table on the existing sheet. A1 is fine. Click OK. And there we have our proper data set with all 6 columns on the data sheet. Over here, we can see there's our query, 50,897 rows loaded. Now I want to create a quick pivot table report just so we can see that it will update when we add a new Excel file. Now, we're still using Excel tables on an Excel sheet. We're not in the data model yet, but sometimes this is just what you want. We don't have very much data. We just want to build a simple standard pivot table. We're even going to group by date. Now, watch this. When I create a pivot table and drag and drop fields into my pivot table, the field names will automatically appear. Now, this is Office 365, and I got to show you a great default pivot table setting that will work both for standard pivot tables and data model from Power Pivot pivot tables. We go up to File, down to Options, and here's Excel Options, Data. This is new. Again, there are so many amazing things in Office 365. You just got to be sure and get that latest version. But there it is, Edit Default Layout for Pivot Tables. I'm going to click, and I've already set mine. Show all subtotals at top of group. Grand totals on for rows and columns. And here it is, the default setting we've been waiting for years. Show in tabular form. This layout will always show the field names instead of that silly column labels and row labels. You can also come down here, Pivot Table Options. You access this options. I usually do it by right-clicking the pivot table. And all of these options can be set by default. Click OK. I've already set mine. Click OK. Click OK. Now we want to build a standard pivot table. Now last video, remember, we did a query and loaded the data to a pivot table cache. Here we're going to assume we wanted to load the data here so we can filter or sort and then make a pivot table. Now we're going to do a standard pivot table and do things like group by date and add slicers. I have a single cell selected, up to Insert Pivot Table, or I can use the keyboard Alt-N-V. Now, when Power Query dumped it into an Excel sheet, it dumped it as an Excel table object. So, of course, step one, it got the table name and the exact proper data set. The default is New Worksheet. That's what we want. Guess what? I don't even have to use my mouse. Because that button is highlighted, that means when I hit the Enter key, that Excel table is loaded into a pivot table cache on a new worksheet. Now I'm going to drag the field list over here. The first thing we want to do is I want to do grouping. So I drag date down to rows. And we're in Office 365, so grouping is done automatically. I can see over here the dates are grouped. I want years over in the column area. I don't want quarters or dates. Notice that quarters and years are added as new fields. Now we want to put product down in the rows. Instantly we get a unique list. Sales rep, remember, that's the column we created from the sheet tab names. I drag it down below product. Now we want to look at sales, so I drag it down to the values area. And because this is a standard pivot table, not a data model pivot table, every time we make a calculation, we have to right-click in the values area and add our number formatting directly. So I'm going to add something like currency, maybe 0 decimals. Click OK. Now with a single cell in the pivot table, I want to add 2 slicers. So I go up to Pivot Table Tools, Analyze, Filter Group, and Insert Slicer. Now I want to see Product and City. Click OK. Now we can click and drag and format these. Slicer Tools Options. I'm going to say, hey, 2 columns. Click and drag to resize. City, we can move it, resize it. Actually, I'm going to leave some room here. Now I can go over and see just Aspen. There's all the sales rep. If I want to see Aspen in the Oakland store, there's the 3 sales rep. Now I want you to remember from the prerequisite classes, what is happening in that cell right there? Well, it's a sum calculation with 4 conditions. It's not adding all the numbers from the sales column. It's adding only the sales where the product is Aspen. That's 1 condition or criteria. Sales rep is equal to Gab. That's the 2nd condition. The year is 2016. That's the 3rd condition. And the city is Oakland. 4 conditions. Now, actually, the city isn't affecting that calculation right there, because anytime we have Gab in the sales rep column, we also have Oakland in the city column. This slicer, when I change it to Portland, is helping us to choose the sales rep. So technically, we only have 3 conditions or criteria. Not only that, another thing about that condition, when I select Oakland, it's running an AND logical test. That means over in the data set, in the product column, it has to find, for the record, the product Aspen. And in the same record, sales rep equal to Gab, and year equal to 2016. And then, of course, Oakland will be in the city column. An and logical test means for the record, or for a number to be included in that calculation, that record has to meet all conditions or criteria. Now, with a standard pivot table, you don't have to think so much about that. When we get over to studying the data model and DAX formulas, we'll have to be sometimes more careful with thinking about what goes into that calculation. So many pivot table users never think explicitly about what each one of these numbers mean. And actually, the whole true power of a pivot table is that it makes calculations with conditions or criteria. Now, oftentimes, you hear people define what a pivot table does. It makes summary reports or reports with summary calculations. But that's not it. The true definition is it makes calculations with conditions or criteria. So we could fully define the pivot table as summary reports with calculations based on one or more conditions or criteria. All right, now I'm going to unfilter this using that red X. And now I want to go test. I'm going to drag a new file into our folder. Here's our report. There's our query. Oops, I'm going to double click sheet 3 and call this PT report or something like that. Always name everything. Sheet 1, no matter how casual the project, is not a good name. Now, when you downloaded all the files, one of the files was a San Jose file. If I double click and open this, you can see there's our 4 columns of data. And in the sheet name, each one has a sales rep. When I close this, you can see the file name has the city. Control C, double click. Control V. Remember, Power Query is looking at that folder. This is the real power of Power Query. We have some files here. We have a new file that meets all of our filtering conditions. So now when I go back over to Excel, I have 2 things, a query and a pivot table. Now, throughout the evolution of the power tools in Excel, refreshing hasn't always worked as seamlessly as we wanted to. Sometimes we have to refresh both objects. Remember, this is a pivot table cache, and that's a Power Query query. We come up to data. And I'm hoping that this button right here, refresh all, will refresh both the pivot table cache and our queries. However, that's not what it does. It will refresh queries and connections only. So when I click refresh all, I can see 61,607 rows have been loaded. So San Jose is in the query. But we have to come over to the pivot table and right-click refresh. I wish that they would fix that button so that it would not only refresh the query, but the pivot table cache also. But no problem. I'll take 2 separate clicks to refresh to totally incorporate San Jose in our slicer. And down here, there's our new sales rep. Now, remember that if we go over to data, we actually loaded this data to an Excel sheet. Last video, we saw how to load this directly to a pivot table cache. So if you do not need the data on a sheet, if you load it directly to pivot table cache, it'll refresh by simply refreshing the pivot table 1 time. Now we can come over and use our slicer and select San Jose. And just like that, our data from San Jose shows up. Now, we can also, from a single column, when we have a slicer, we're allowed to select more than 1 item. I can click on Carlota, and holding Control, I'm going to click on Quad and Tri-Fly. Now, that's the freestyle group. Now we can see from San Jose each one of the sales reps and how they did selling these freestyle boomerangs. Now, each calculation here has 3 criteria. Quad, that's the first condition. Bow, that's the second condition. 2017, that's the third condition. If I come up here, it's Bow 2017, but now it's Carlota. Now there's one last thing we want to do. We want to try and break the connection. And then we'll have to come back and edit the query. If we go over to Windows Explorer This folder right here has a specific name, and it's hard-coded over there in Power Query. If we change the location, change the name, in this case, we're going to change the name, F2. So now the file name has a -01 at the end. That will break the connection. If I come over here and right-click refresh, luckily it's polite. Data source not found. It's trying to look for that folder right there. I'm going to click OK. We can come over and double-click the query. And it's the very first step source. For step 1, off to the right, we click on this bicycle gear icon. And now at the very end, I'm going to type -01, click OK. Click Close and Load. Now we have reconnected our query to the correct folder. Now, later in the class, we'll learn about parameters, how we can actually build a variable in for that file name. But lots of times, it's important. If you just have a query and you need to edit, that's important to know how to do. All right, so in this video, we saw how to use Power Query to import multiple Excel files, extract the file name and the sheet tab names to create a proper data set. Then we created a report, and we're able to drop a new file into that folder and have everything update. We also, in this video, saw that with Power Query, unlike last video where it was relatively easy to extract and append tables together in Excel, we had to worry about different objects. We saw how to use the amazing Excel.Workbook Function and a bunch of filtering tricks to get exactly the objects we wanted for our report. All right, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excelisfun, including our next video, number 5. We'll see how to do something similar, but when all the tables are in the same workbook. All right, we'll see you next video.